Cool. So yeah, you can see my screen, right? This is the third meeting to go over the certificate signing request adoption. And in this meeting, I want to answer, or I think we're well placed to try and answer the 3 statements that I put in the calendar invite. So 3 of them are the CSR controllers will exist in cert-manager controller. So this is whether the actual certificate signing request controllers will exist in cert-manager or not. So if I have cert-manager installed, then I can use the certificate signing request resource with cert-manager in the kind of default installation of cert-manager. Cert-manager will support this resource. That's kind of the same as the first one, I guess. But kind of more leading on to, like, changing the certificate resource to instead create a certificate signing request resource rather than certificate requests. And then the future of the certificate request resource. So this is whether we'd want to do that kind of certificate flip, or we want to delete the certificate request resource altogether in favor of this upstream CSR resource. So those are the 3 things that I want to kind of get an answer for today. I think we're pretty close to getting there at this point. As you might have seen, so Mo gave some good review on this design document, and he mentioned a couple of things which I thought were quite important. So the first thing that he brought up was the problem with the scoping of CSRs. So originally we said that maybe, like, perhaps we could provide some kind of OPA rules or something like that, or some kind of suggested mechanism so that we could restrict what different users could list, like what CSRs different users could list based on some kind of namespacing rules or something like that. And that wouldn't really be possible with any kind of admission webhook, because Mo quite rightly said that you can't do admission webhooks on read requests. So you'd have to do some kind of aggregated API server. So that's not really great. We have already, basically we'd have to install like an aggregated API server, which is like a whole kind of, a whole thing to implement and another thing to go wrong, basically. I think you, Mel?
What's the problems that come with implementing our own API server, aggregated API server?
I guess you increase latency of every single request. You have the kind of classic issue already about, like, webhooks in general being quite flaky. So you're introducing more webhooks. I don't know if you can scope aggregated API servers by resource. I'm pretty sure you have to do it for everything, which is another.
No, I think it's just that it doesn't aggregated API is the opposite of a webhook. You don't. The webhook's adding latency to each request is the main issue, and you can break the API server if your webhook is slow. Like, you need to respond within 2 seconds or something, and if not, then you add 2 seconds of latency to every request. Now, with the aggregation layer, it only calls the upstream API that you're providing if you try and get to that path. I think the downsides are around RBAC. You lose expressiveness, because basically you have to use the HTTP verbs section of RBAC.
So you cannot use the
I think you can express this user can get but can't post or can't put or something like that, but it's a bit less expressive. I think you probably can do what we want, but I wouldn't say off the top of my head whether we could or not. But you basically have paths and HTTP verbs rather than API types. But I mean, paths are types depending on how you've designed your API.
Some small review on the RBAC API, but I think that's generally quite good. There was some questions around the modes adding a not after hint, which will be like a time on the upstream CSR resource. We had some conversation about how we could do some kind of conversion or how we can kind of transition to the resource. I think we both agree there is kind of like a conversion path there. You can basically calculate a duration based on like timestamps, if that makes sense, or at least you can calculate a not after hint based from the time duration plus the timestamp, and then you can also do that in reverse. So you can do the not after hint minus the timestamp of the resource, and you can calculate a duration. So I think it is possible to kind of try and calculate that. But yeah, it's kind of like a non-trivial conversion. Definitely possible. He then also brought up a good point about what happens if the webhook fails. I think thinking about it a bit more and what you said yesterday, Jake, I think I'm probably less fearful of this problem occurring than I was when I initially read it. I think you have this issue with webhooks anyway. It is just a case where we have a webhook on the renewal of certificates of kubelet, so it is quite a kind of high risk operation, but yeah, it's something to keep in mind at least.
Yeah, I think it introduces a failure mode, but it's similar failure mode to other critical webhooks. Like if OPA, like if your OPA pods are all crashing, then you would have like other API issues. We'd have a similar problem, but it's critical just because of how like the kubelets would leave the cluster if we had a failure, whereas opposed to OPA failure when just you wouldn't be able to do new API requests.
Yeah, exactly. I think that was mostly it. Yeah, he also mentioned about the kind of strong language I used to say that about like the approval mechanism. But I think we covered that, and policy is coming, and it's the current behavior from today. So I think they were the main points that he raised, or at least kind of have high impact on the kind of design document as a whole. So going back to the kind of original statements, what do people feel like they want to do going from here? Should we? I mean, there's so many hurdles to kind of adopting this. Do people still feel like they are keen to have CSR and cert-manager in some capacity? Do they want the certificate request to be completely replaced, or do you think we should bin this and instead go down the route of implementing separate signers, similar to the Venafi signer or the the CA signer and those kind of things? What are people's feelings about this?
Mary, your hand's raised, dude. Do you have a feeling?
No, wait. I have my. Oh, sorry. No, I don't have any feelings. Sorry, I'm a bit lost. So I don't know.
Like we might be in like a better position once we know more how the upstream CSR develops, like to decide. Like, do we still expect large changes there or like large decisions that would affect us?
In theory, no. The API is V1, therefore, in order for them to make any kind of significant differences or changes, then they would have to create a V2, and that's the whole thing. I can see them adding fields over time, like there's not after a hint, for example, or something they've added, and you can have the CA field as well, which they're thinking about adding as well. I think Mo might have even mentioned it as well.
So my worry.
What's the CA field?
So the certificate authority field. Oh,
He's gone.
that's the wrong button.
Sorry, Jake.
He's back.
Mute and leave are next to each other.
The actual kind of CA bundle field. So in certificate request, it's a spec.ca. In CSR, it's not a field. So in order to get around this, we would base64 encode the certificate in an annotation. Which, yeah.
But it's not like a request field. It's not like I want to use this CA. It's not, you know, that's still the domain of signer name.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
So my worries are the same as at the beginning. So like it's a V1 API, but it's designed for basically kubelet only. So that's why it has all these, like, it doesn't support the same set of features that we do. Like, it's namespacing is just not being namespaced is sad to me. So I think there was a comment at the very top of your proposal. It's like, make sure that we have a good why when we adopt this, because I know there is. Like comment from James and Mo saying, I would like to know the why, the why behind the proposed change.
Yeah, perhaps my biggest fear is like we will get into a state of like split community in certificates in Kubernetes. Take Istio, for example, they're adding support for the CSR. And we can obviously implement signers where appropriate and things like that. But if they're not like treated as, you know, compatible resources in cert-manager, you lose everything that comes after the request, like, you know, observability or other policy features and those kind of things that it will extend, that get extended onto cert-manager. That makes sense.
Yeah, so I mean, I should reply to that comment, but I think from my point of view, the whys are not having to have a hard dependency on installing cert-manager and its webhook before you can start managing some kind of certificate. And other projects using the CSR API already, like Istio uses it, and I found it in the docs for Cockroach TV. So those are, I should write that on the as a reply.
I'd agree with Josh. I think it's also just trying to avoid that kind of fragmentation, because what you don't want to happen is to have all those issues that have been built to sort of not be useful, right? But also being able to sign.
And again, on this, another one of my original points was it will be sad that any external issuers won't be able to pick this up because it's a new API. It's like if you're an external issuer, which is a controller for cert-manager and CRs. So this will only be like when we adopt CSRs, and like we'll only be able to use like cert-manager internal issuers, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So there will be a fragmentation anyway.
Yeah, it feels a bit sad. I put a suggestion, but I don't think it was a good one, about like having some kind of shim that would convert Kubernetes CSRs to cert-manager CRs and vice versa. Does anyone have any strong thoughts about that?
I think it's not great to be doing that. Like, just by itself is like kind of a hacky thing to do. To be kind of duplicating resources because reasons. And for that to become our like kind of default operation, kind of just proves that the API itself isn't fit for purpose.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's one or the other. There needs to be ideally a transition.
Yeah, that's Josh's last question. Do we completely move from cert-manager certificate request to Kubernetes CSR in some point in the future?
I think that has to be like an aspiration. I think because I think, as per like what you were saying last time, you might argue what's the point maintaining, or what's the point trying to have both? Oh yeah, it would be good ultimately to use the upstream, but I think it may take some time because it's going to need probably some amendment. Of which some changes have already happened, haven't they? I saw a PR just recently for a new field as an example. So I hopefully, if we can sort of work with the upstream and we can get closer to I mean, we're not going to get to a parity, are we? But closer to a
I think like the way the design document is written is to have one-to-one parity. So you should be able to write a conversion between the two resources. I think that should always be true. It's this namespacing issue. I think
I guess that's what I meant, is that there's not going to be complete parity unless we solve that, and that seems like a big one.
Do you actually know,
not
like,
to say it can't be solved differently, right? If I remember the discussion last time, there may be some different approaches to solving that.
do you know like how many external issuers there are, and like approximately like how big loss, like how many people use them, or like what would be the size of the impact for like if they were all become kind of unusable?
So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 external issuers listed on the website. But I know for a fact that people write external issuers privately in companies.
Possible to provide some kind of shim that you could install on the external issuer so that it just creates a CSR from that CR rather than something that they could add to the external issuer somehow. Like
maybe we should have an external issuer library, and then all they would need to do is pull an updated version. But I guess we're going a little bit away from.
I still don't fully understand why we can't just do both. I think it is still not super clear to me why we can't just implement CSR controllers in cert-manager. But that's just not the default request resource to use. But with a default installation, I can create a CSR that references a cert-manager issuer, and it will sign as expected.
Yeah, it doesn't actually. It shouldn't affect the outcome of this meeting. This is what I'm trying to say.
Oh, I see. No, yeah. No. But I think like that. Well, what I'm trying to say is that is my current kind of thought moving forward. At least this approach unblocks us, right? So it may be that we have some assumptions about this whole design which are fundamentally flawed. And if we at least implement the controllers in cert-manager and have them running either through an experimental feature flag for a while, or just have them on by default, but kind of separate code to the kind of core code, at least then we can find out some of these assumptions that might be kind of completely wrong. That would be my kind of suggestion moving forward, I think. Silence.
It's really good now, I think. Like if you, because that's like the least work. Like you don't have to remove the certificate request straight away. Just
And experimental feature flags can be any code under that flag can be deleted at any time, right? That's the whole point of having a signal that the code is experimental in the first place. Is that, you know, maybe chucked into the void.
With a just kind of clarify, that would be to like have it experimental for a number of releases, to almost like as a proving ground, and then
Exactly. So basically the same approach that we did for certificate requests, right? So
yeah, that makes
I think we
sense,
put that behind a feature flag for a release or two. I think we did the same thing for the new certificate controller, for example. I think as long as we signal that this code could be deleted at any time, we're not sure if this is the right thing to do, but we're clearly interested in doing something with it. We're just not sure what the right approach is yet. At least if we have the code in there, we have the code running. I think maybe we can make a more informed decision, perhaps.
And could we and would we be able to get the inbuilt issuers to support both CR and TSR?
Yeah, so this is probably maybe more implementation details, but basically I think in the code we would want to write this kind of idea of a shim, I guess, where we kind of abstract the resource of a request resource, and then we can have underlying we have a single underlying kind of issuer implementation that accepts a generic request, and then both the kind of certificate request and the certificate sign-in request controllers can kind of feed in its
I see. I mean, that seems like quite a good direction to go.
would you do the same with the certificate controllers? Because they would need to understand if they need to modify the CR or CSR.
I think my push would be for that we don't change the certificate controller at all, at least for the first iteration.
Just add another controller. That would be my preference as well.
So the CSRs are only concerned with CSRs, and the certificate controller is only concerned with CRs, our internal type.
So we don't create CSRs from certificates in the first iteration.
Exactly. This would unblock use cases like the Istio example, for example. It's the minimal disruptive change, and it's code that has to be written anyway. So.
Okay.
What do people think? I feel like I've been talking quite a lot.
How much work is it to like add this controller and so on? Because I know that the current certificate request code is quite involved, or am I wrong?
I feel like it's. I don't feel like it's that much, to be honest. These controllers are fairly small. Like the actual certificate request controller part of it is quite small. And what we can even do is just make this a certificate request here, like some kind of internal generic certificate request. And we can basically use all the same code, is my feeling.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not a trivial amount of work. It is quite it is work to do.
Well, it makes sense to do because you have already done the user identity fields, etc. So they're already quite similar.
Mm-hmm. The approval conditions are a prerequisite that need to be done. Silence.
Is there a way that we can have the issuer like optionally support that, and then if you can reference in a signer name an issuer, and then we can either have that issuer handle it, or say that issuer doesn't support CSR API, you can update it to do that, and then like maybe provide an easy way for companies to do that on their own internal one, but that would allow us to kind of begin moving forward in that direction and try things out without requiring everyone to rewrite their issuers or do anything immediately. Or is that just not a very useful way forward? Does it not get us anything that we want to be doing?
Sorry, could you repeat that? I think I don't really understand.
So have a way where like an issuer we can tell whether an issuer supports like the shim or whatever it is, that allows an issuer to support certificate request and certificate signing request. And then if the issuer doesn't support that yet, just kind of report that in the status or whatever. But if it does, then kind of just hand it off to the issuer and let the issuer sign the certificate signing request. And then there's like a transition path that doesn't require everyone to change everything immediately, but kind of sets the expectation that that's the way forward, and people should shift if they care about supporting certificate signing requests at all.
Yeah, I think it would work like that implicitly. Like I can't foresee a release where we don't implement every single internal issuer in one single release. But if that happens, then that happens. What would the outcome of that happening would be that cert-manager wouldn't change anything on certificate signing requests because it just ignores it because it doesn't have an issuer for it. And it would be the same for external issuers. Like they just literally don't have the controller for it, so it won't update the condition on it at all.
Right. Okay. So it doesn't really help us at all.
I think, well, no, actually, no, that's not true. I guess, no, that's not true. I think it's like a slim case. So we'd only process certificate signing requests if the signer name is in the cert-manager group, I think. Yeah, that's the only case. And it's similar to certificate requests in that if you create a certificate request with a group with an issuer reference that is outside cert-manager, but that issuer doesn't exist, or there's not a controller running that's watching for it, nothing will happen. It will just sit there.
Yeah, I guess that's pretty close. Yeah. So I mean, I'm not like, what are we trying to figure out here? Like, whether it's in our interest to like make a plan that obsoletes certificate request and uses CSR for everything, and how do we get there, or what's most useful to people in the in the short term. I think what we're talking about is, do we want to get rid of certificate request in the end, in the future?
I mean, yeah. Do we?
I don't know. Does it change what we're doing now?
I don't think we don't want to remove CSR. I mean CR until there's feature parity with CSR.
Mm-hmm.
But like it's like a noble goal, but I don't think we need to worry about it for another like few cycles of we should make sure that we're in the SIG auth meetings.
Mm.
Like we can have the noble goal of removing CR, but don't need. I wouldn't personally like even think about it. We can like it doesn't affect. We can implement controllers for Kubernetes CSR without touching our stuff.
Yeah, because if we're talking about removing CR and you going entirely to CSR in like a couple of years' time, and it doesn't change what we would do today, then in one sense we don't need to have an answer to whether we want to do that, because the steps are going to be the same, and it's a problem for like a year's time, 2 years' time, something like that. We might want to continue having the discussion to figure out, to be able to talk about what our plan is, what our strategy is, where we want to be going, but it doesn't get in the way of the engineering work in the short term and supporting, because we definitely want to support CSR. That is inarguable. It's further down the line where the split comes. So if we support CSR today, and then we can continue having the discussion, or we can defer it for 6-12 months while we figure out how CSR works, how the adoption's going, whether people want to do that, whether people are making feature requests that are at a rate too fast for CSR to support. If we move to CSR, we're reliant on what goes into upstream Kubernetes and that kind of support, and having our own CID might allow us to move a bit quicker on something. So it's not entirely black and white to me, but if it makes no difference today, then we don't need to decide today.
But if we were to keep both, it's always going to be the case that for a particular deployment, it will be either or, right? There's no other way, I assume.
No, I don't think so. I think in my proposal, we have them both running. Certificates now and perhaps forever will always create certificate requests. But if someone created a certificate signing request by itself, that's referencing cert-manager, then cert-manager will sign it as well.
But that would then mean that there won't be CSRs created from certificates then.
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, and I guess there could be a new type, like upstream certificate, CSR certificate, that would do that, or you could have a flag on your cert-manager deployment to choose which you wanted, or you could have an option on a particular certificate. Like those would be options for the future, right? Once we supported CSRs.
Yeah. I think for now we would just start writing a controller for CSR and put it behind a flag whether to start it.
Mm-hmm.
And just thinking of sorry, Jake, with the signers we've already got, right? Signer CA, signer Venafi. I mean, they probably need upgrading, I should think. I mean, are they relatively up to date? But I mean, what I mean is we've got to start right on that. We've got some signers which support CSR.
Yeah, I mean, like I've got a branch locally of a signer implementation. Like
Cool. Yeah.
And in fact, Richard made a good point about this on my issue as PR, that we could even take a look at doing it with like the whole controller runtime stuff, perhaps not.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a separate conversation, but yeah.
Cool. Okay. No, makes sense. Yeah, I mean, it feels like a good path to take, I think.
Just make it like signer interface wrapper that just calls our existing stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I feel like at this point, get something working, and then we can review whether it looks like how we imagined it, and whether that's a good thing.
In terms of release pipeline, where do we want to try and pin it for? At least this kind of first iteration of adding the controllers in.
It depends on, again, you said there was something else that needed to be done first, which was like the approval.
So we need to add approval conditions, and this is all part of the policy work, I guess, which is pinned for 1.3. For policy, it does complicate policy somewhat because we do need to introduce some kind of shim or abstraction to a request resource for policy to have parity across the two resources, which I think is something that we do want to achieve. That's probably something that we're going to, if we go ahead with the CSR work, it's something that's going to happen anyway. That is work that always needs to be done. So yeah, there's just some prerequisites about making sure that the two resources do have parity. So it is adding these approval conditions to this different request and making this different request immutable and just making sure they're like perfectly aligned and making it putting in the code a way to make them a nice interface between the two.
Why do we need to bother trying to have them aligned before creating like this CSR controller?
So you took the approval mechanism, for example. I have a policy mechanism that says, input this resource and return yes or no. If you don't make them perfectly the same and have some kind of abstraction, you're having to write two policy engines for two different resources that are doing functionally the same thing.
Yeah, I think that it would be great if there was some steps towards this into CSR in 1.3, but policy is more time critical. So starting with that one as the goal to get that in 1.3, and then if there is time to squeeze some of this into 1.3, then great. We can figure out what that looks like. But yeah, policy is the priority from my point of view, and it will be totally fine, to have, if we're talking about a controller that you enable, if you want to try out the CSR functionality, that would be totally fine. It would be totally fine if that didn't have policy integration for in 1.3, but it's still something to figure out how to do these things together, and it's important to take that into account in the design and implementation process. If we know that we want to do both of these things and have them work together, then figure out a way that is going to allow that, so we don't implement them both and then and then find out that we can't make them work together. So yeah, we wouldn't have to necessarily support both of them in 1.3 if policy, if the first version of policy is there and an alpha of certificate signing requests is there, then we wouldn't have to have policy work for certificate signing requests in 1.3. But having a path that we know we would be able to make them work together would be critical.
You mentioned the policy work out, and I'm trying to take notes in the biweekly open source meeting. Can I is it actually something that people can understand if I say policy design? Because I think it's internal.
Yeah, but it'll be external tomorrow, so we'll be able to talk about it in the community meeting tomorrow. So
incoming. I'll just.
I think I think people generally understand what that means. It's when Mo said here, for example, about things automatically getting approved, basically no matter what, and saying that's scary. I think
Hmm.
You know, yeah, I understand this, but I was just like looking for a link to add, because
I see.
when I say
Yeah.
policy design, then
Mhm.
I prefer when
there's-
there is a link for people to check out.
So there's
fine.
a GitHub issue. Yeah. Somewhere.
Third one down.
Yeah, that's like a standalone issue. There's also like a design reference. Yeah, here's the one. 3473.
Thanks.
Yeah. So this would be updated when that happens.
Thanks.
Okay, so it sounds to me we have some consensus on a path forward, but still some details to work out about the implementation. Would that be accurate?
I think, yeah, that seems fair to me.
Cool.
Oh, yeah, I'd be happy for the details to work themselves out, like in the process of implementing, rather than doing another planning.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, there'll still be some parts that will warrant some discussion, but we don't need to all work together on an implementation design to solve all those problems.
And I still have this kind of nagging feeling that there's some kind of fundamental thing that we're assuming, some kind of assumption that just isn't true. But then we'll only find out when we start implementing it, is my feeling.
Something we're assuming about, capabilities of cert-manager and what CSR can provide, and yeah, that's certainly possible. But the best way to do that is to, we've discussed it, so we've kind of highlighted some of the ones that we know about and have workarounds for those. And if there are other ones, then the only way we'll find out is trying to do it right. So yeah,
can't say we didn't do our due diligence.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Cool. Is there more to discuss now then, do you think, or have we done enough at this stage?
I think in terms of discussion, it's done. I don't know what people want to, what people think we should do about the actual PR itself for the design document. To merge it in as is probably not true. I think merged designs historically in cert-manager have been something that is true. And this clearly isn't true. So don't know whether we want to leave the PR open, create a separate design document that references this one and kind of illustrates what we're doing for the first iteration. Is it worth writing a design document, another one, or yeah, what are people's feelings about it?
Sorry, did you say secret?
Secret.
No, I misheard maybe. So what would be the, like, would it be the point of making it secret? Would it be to avoid,
I didn't say secret.
being fast? No. I mean, like, is it in order to avoid like community being involved with this?
Nobody said secret, Mael.
Sorry.
I don't know what you heard, but yeah,
it's my.
Yeah, no one's proposing that we do a secret design.
No, sorry.
Separate, perhaps. Separate design. Separate.
Maybe. Yes, that's it.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what's useful. I think it might be fine to like edit this one a little bit and just kind of put a header at the top of like, this is a rough design that shows how we're thinking about these things, but specific details will be worked out in. Thanks, Matt. Specific details will be worked out in in more more specific designs for each phase of this or something like that, because it's still worth, still worth showing what we're thinking about in a more definite way than a PR. But yeah, not kind of merging this as like, this is exactly how everything's going to unfold over the next next couple of years or whatever. It's just, this is how we were thinking about it at the time. If you want to know more details, look for specific follow-ups for particular things.
I think just as long as we commit to updating the design when we finished working out like Kubernetes merges designs that are not implemented and end up slightly different.
Yeah, that's what I kind of meant about like that's how it's worked historically, but that's not necessarily how cert-manager has to do things going forward. Kind of thing.
Right.
So maybe we just add that label at the top and then merge it. Just because it's another thing that's
add the label, because the only issue with merging it is then it starts to show up in Google searches. Because I found designs in Kubernetes that I've Googled when looking for the actual feature, and then the design is not the same as the implemented feature. So just put a big note at the top saying, this is a design.
Yeah.
This is a pre-implementation design, and we'll have to change if
I think put that at the top. Just go through the kind of review comments and just see if there's anything there that's worthy of inclusion in the doc itself. Either just updating the phrasing a little bit or something to make something more clear, or just saying like one area of concern is this and we haven't figured out how to tackle that yet or something, right? Like, so those concerns aren't dismissed by merging it. But
yeah, cool, that makes sense.
Cool. All right. Anything else?
I'm gonna stop the recording.